Hey guys, today we're ready to actually start painting our watercolor landscape. And the first step that we're going to do is we're actually going to use painter's tape, and we're going to tape off our borders to keep them clean. Now our borders are there to kind of give us some wiggle room with our craftsmanship, but usually with any kind of painting like watercolor or acrylic, artists will tape off their borders so that they can have a nice clean border after their painting is done. So I'm just gonna kind of measure it. Don't waste the tape, please. Just measure how much you need and rip this off. And this tape is not super sticky. That's why it's called painter's tape, because it's gonna be easy to peel off once we're finished with our painting. So I'm gonna line up the edge of my tape with the edge of my border right where it meets my drawing. And I'm going to carefully press that down. It's really important that you take your time with this. And you might notice I do have some extra edges. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna fold it behind and tape it off on the back. I'm gonna do the same to this side. And I am going to tape off the left, the right, and the bottom. All right, I do have a little bit of my border still showing, and that's totally fine. We just want to tape off the part of our border that's actually going to touch our painting. And after we finish this entire painting, once it's completely dry, we are going to peel off that tape to reveal some nice clean edges. And here I have a variety of paint brushes. I have a large fluffy watercolor paintbrush, a small watercolor paintbrush, and I have a larger acrylic paintbrush and a smaller acrylic paintbrush. I do like using acrylic paintbrushes when I'm doing watercolor, specifically for any like tiny or sharper details that I want to add later. I'm probably not going to use my acrylic paintbrushes until closer to the end of my painting, because these paintbrushes are usually just for like details, and details come last in a watercolor painting. So I'm actually going to set those off to the side because I'm going to focus using my watercolor paintbrushes right now. Because what we're going to do is we need to plan out our painting, because when you're painting with watercolor, you have to think of it in layers. So for this first layer, I'm thinking of, what main colors do I see? So of course my trees are going to be a darker brown color. The path is going to be brown. I'm going to do a little bit of blue up here because I can see some of the sky. But with a watercolor painting, you're not really painting all the details right now. You're kind of just giving the impression of what you see. I do have a scrap piece of paper here off to the side because I like to have kind of a practice sheet as I'm mixing colors to kind of see what it's going to look like before I commit and put it on my final paper. And I'm going to continue using my reference photo to show me what colors I need to make. So I know I need to make kind of a yellowy green color here. I need to make a yellowish brown. Some blue greens I can see back there. I'm gonna have fun with my colors. I'm not gonna be like super exact or super details because we are just doing the impression. Right now on this first layer, it's going to be very, very loose. And I'm just gonna take my paintbrush. I'm gonna activate some of my colors here. Go ahead and get them ready. I know I'm going to be using blue. I know I'm going to be using yellow and green for sure. So I'm just going to go ahead and activate those paints. And I'm definitely going to be using brown. Okay, so I need to organize myself here a little bit because I got a lot going on. You might need to stop and organize before you start painting as well. But I'm actually going to move this off to the side. I'm going to do a few color tests. I'm going to mix some colors and see if I like them. All right, so I have my palette here and I've kind of just mixed quite a few different greens. I got my path color, my sky color. I did end up using a little bit of purple in my blue because I felt like this blue from my tray here was just too primary. So I wanted to kind of dull it down a little bit, make it look a little bit more natural. And I'm pretty happy with those colors. So I'm going to bring over my final painting, and I am going to use my picture as a reference, and I am going to start painting my colors where I see them. This is just the first layer, guys. So we are not really worried too much about all the details. This is like your base layer for your painting, and it's probably one of the most important layers, because if you don't get the colors right on this layer and you don't put the colors in the correct spot, then it's going to kind of throw off your entire painting. So it's really important for this first layer that you are mixing your colors correctly. Don't use colors straight from the paint tray, because like I said a second ago, those are way too primary and you need more natural colors most of the time. And I am just going to kind of paint in my colors where I see them. So I'm starting up here. I definitely see sky up here. So I'm just gonna paint blue where I see the sky in my picture. And it's kind of like coloring. I am going to, you know, try to stay inside the lines as best as I can. If you have a beautiful sunset or something, you can be a little bit more loose with yours. However, mine has a lot of smaller areas, so I kind of have to be more exact with where I'm putting my colors. That really depends on your landscape. So what I'm going to do now is I am just going to take my time, and I'm going to use my paintbrush and my colors, and I'm basically just going to paint in where I see those colors. And I'm going to be very loose with it. Of course, if I make a mistake, I can just dry my paintbrush off on my messy mat or my paper towel and use this paintbrush to pick up any paint. So it's kind of dark right there, so I can just pick that paint up with my paintbrush and wipe it off on the side to lighten that area up. So don't forget that. If you do make a mistake, it's okay. All right, so let me go ahead and finish painting in all these little areas. And I'll be back after this layer has dried. I'll show you how to do the next couple layers. All right, it is the next day because I needed to let this first layer dry 100%. So it's gonna take a few class periods to build up our layers, and that's totally fine. For your first layer, again, it's really important that you don't go too dark too fast. I do have some darker values back here, but that's just because I know in my picture, these trees back here are going to be like my darkest values. I didn't go super dark on my main trees up here yet, but that's what our layers are going to do. So right now, these are kind of like my lighter values, and as I keep building these layers, it's going to get like darker and darker and darker as I go on. Now what I'm going to do, now that I have my base layer done, I've laid out all my colors and, you know, partial values here and there, I am going to stick to the same color palette. So whatever colors you mix for your first layer, we're gonna keep those. So you need to remember how to make those specific colors. So this is my color palette. This is what I'm going to use for my entire painting. As I'm building up my darker values, I'm just gonna be using less water. So for my first layer, I used quite a bit of water because I wanted it to be light. So as I build up my darker values, I'm going to start using less and less water. By the end of this, you're probably going to have about 3 to 4, maybe even 5 layers, depending on you know, your landscape and your picture. So I need to remix some of my colors based on my last color palette. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and I'll be right back to show you how I'm gonna paint my second layer. All right, I think I have all my colors here, and I can mix more as I'm working if I need to. At this point, you can start, you know, switching up your paint brushes. Everybody should use a fluffy, kind of larger watercolor paintbrush for your first layer, and then after that, once you have your entire paper covered with some sort of color or value, then you can start, you know, switching up your brushes a little bit. You might want to start adding some smaller details. You might want to start doing some dry brush texture in some areas, because I know for sure I have a lot of leaves, I have a lot of grass, so I'm going to be using dry brush, definitely, because I want to signify those blades of grass and those singular leaves, like all those leaves on my trees, with some sort of texture. So I'm going to use my techniques to my advantage, and I'm going to use a dry brush to do that. However, before I start doing that, I'm just going to do another second layer, kind of building up my values a little bit. So I'm going to take this smaller paintbrush, and I'm going to start making this tree a little bit darker. I know on the right side of my tree it's lighter because that's where the sun is hitting it, so I want the left side of my tree to be a lot darker. So I'm just going to put a darker value right on the right side, and this doesn't have to be perfect because this is nature, so it can be kind of like a you know, a curvy kind of line. It can be kind of rough because this is a tree, so maybe I want the edge of my tree to be kind of more bumpy instead of making it perfectly straight. These are all things that you also should be thinking about as you are painting. So think about your brush. What kind of brush do you want to use? Think about building up your values, doing it one layer at a time. So this is only my second layer on this tree. I'm probably going to put at least 2 more layers, really building up that value to make it super dark on the right side and keeping my left side light. So right now I'm not going to add anything else to my left side because that's going to be my lightest value. So I'm happy with that. I'm only going to start focusing now on the darker side, and I'm just going to start painting darker values on that side. And same for this tree. I'm gonna not touch the right side of my tree because that's pretty much done already, because it's just a lighter value. I don't want to add any more darkness to it, because once you add too much dark, then it's going to be a little bit hard to come back from it. You can use that technique where you pick up paint with your paintbrush, but it's really important that, you know, you go slow, you take your time, and you're still observing your picture and seeing where those highlights are and where those shadows are and what colors you need. Since this is an observational painting, it's really important to paint and draw what you see, not what you know. Okay, we all know that trees are brown, right? But when I look at this picture, they don't look brown to me. They look more of a bluish kind of gray color with maybe a tiny hint of brown. So that's what I'm going to paint, okay? In your picture, you might have water. We know that water is blue, right? But maybe the water in your picture is more of a blue-green, or it has maybe some blue-violet areas. Okay, don't just paint your water straight blue from the palette, because as we know, these colors are very unnatural. A requirement for this project is that you are mixing your own colors, okay? You have to mix your own colors. Never, ever, ever use a color straight from the tray. Over here on this grassy area, I am going to kind of use a dabbing motion with like slightly wet paint. And that's going to create a really cool texture for my shadow down here, and continuing to build up that dark shadow by adding darker paint on top of what I already have. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my second layer, speed it up again, focusing on my values, focusing on my colors, maybe adding some texture here and there with my brush strokes. And making sure I'm always referring back to my reference photo and painting what I see, not what I know.